Thank you so much, Penny, and thank the Union for the wonderful opportunity to be with so many of you via the miracles of modern technology. I love to travel, but I find myself often challenged that I would like to be in many places at the same time. I thought that was impossible, but it looks like you really can. I hope in the course of the webcast, Penny will keep me informed as to exactly which communities are out there to whom I am speaking. I am grateful for those who have fought the good fight and come here to OU headquarters to be part of the studio audience, so I don't feel like I've completely lost my mind standing in a room giving a talk to myself, which is something I do from time to time. But that's for another occasion. The topic today is how a youth director or someone working within the youth department of a complex modern synagogue can maximize the kind of support that she or he enjoys from both the professional and the lay leadership of the synagogue. I think the key here is throw away your job description. It's a bit like the rabbinate. Any rabbi who needs a job description to tell him what to do probably should be in a different line of work, because the job description will never really afford you all of the tools that you will need to accomplish what you really set out to do, which is to be Mamid Ador Yesharim, to establish a generation of healthy, upright, and God-fearing young Jews, and to make the shul a place where Jewish youngsters grow. Also to manufacture the kind of memories that no matter where they find themselves in the course of their hopefully long lives, they will always want to look for a shul, because the very word synagogue will evoke the fondest memories of their childhood and will be a word that is associated with safety and with love and with respect and with the true sense of the presence of the Ribbono Shel Olam. So you are, in effect, the frontline memory builders. So I spoke about ignoring your job description. You need to look at the shul as an organism, as an organization, in the broadest terms, and you have to connect what you're doing. You have to create relevance to each of its aspects and each of its departments. And that sounds daunting, because after all, what did they hire you for? They hired you to make youth groups on Shabbos morning, and they hired you to plan trips, and they hired you to arrange for the bad food for Shabbatonim. Like, that's your job, right? If you can get enough horrible chicken into the shul and there's enough oil in the potato kugel, then you can go home and relax. I don't think that's really it. And if you work in that restricted ambit, you will find that you will be a budget line. In terms of what's going on in the world of the American synagogue today, you do not want to be a budget line. If that's all you are in a shul, you're going to get cut, because shuls are hurting all over. And when leadership sits down and decides what can they trim, the rule of thumb is you trim the invisible. You're not going to trim the program that your best friend is involved in. You're not going to trim the program that you started. If the youth, what do those kids do upstairs every Shabbos morning anyway? Why do they need all that candy? Why do they need refreshments? Why do we send them on trips? I don't even know whose kids they are. If you don't establish yourself as a fixture in the broadest definition of the congregation, if you don't establish relationships between you and the people who will be making the decisions, you will become a budget line. And frankly, you would be better off to be a deer in deer season than to be a budget line. So let's work through some of the personalities with whom you will be engaged. And let's speak about how you can be relevant to them and earn their advocacy so that whatever happens to the kids in the shul, it is really personal with each of them. Of course, we have to begin with the rabbi. There are rabbis who are more influential, rabbis who are less influential. But there is no such thing as a shul where the rabbi doesn't count. What can you do to get your rabbi with you, behind you? See the world from his perspective. First, the easiest thing in the world, make sure that the rabbi of the shul is always involved. And by involved here, I don't mean he has to be at everything. Make sure that he's informed. Make sure that if the rabbi and a balabas walk into the building and they hear some noise from the auditorium or the multi-purpose room, and the lay leader turns to the rabbi and says, "What's that noise?" That the rabbi shouldn't say, "I don't know. It must be something from the youth department." Bad PR. What you want to say is, "Oh, don't you know? This is the week when the youth department has animals come in honor of Parshas Noach," or "This is the week when the kids all get together and make sukkah decorations." If the rabbi knows what's happening, you're going to prevent him from being in a position of feeling out of control and a little bit foolish. Rule of thumb: you make sure that everybody feels good, that everybody feels secure, and that no one is pointing to them saying, "Don't you know what's going on in your own shul?" And you will make some friends. But let's move on. Ask the rabbi to keep the kids in mind in terms of his work as the halachic figure in the shul. So, for example, if the rabbi needs a teenager to serve as a mashgiach from time to time, if you can organize the youngsters of the shul, as we do in my shul, to take care of the bedikas chametz in the entire shul building, you can get some kids who take a little bit of interest in the shul library or the Beis Medrash Svarim and help the rabbi to get his things done by letting him know that there's a team of kids available to him. He will help you advocate, and he will let the shul know that it is the youth of the shul who are helping him run the shul. Some things to consult with your rabbi on. First, before you design your program, you really should find out what the rabbi's macro vision for the shul is and where young people fit into it. Well, there are rabbis whose vision is that the shul should forge ahead in terms of more serious learning. You want to know that. There are rabbis who are more oriented to political activism, rabbis who are more oriented toward binding the shul together socially. There are rabbis who are very interested in membership recruitment. Know what the rabbi wants to accomplish, and particularly know how he envisions the role of the shul's youngsters in this. Specific things to consult with. Anything that's politically risky. Chances are, if the rabbi's been there for a little bit of time, he knows the landscape, and he will keep you from running afoul of the lions and tigers and bears who lurk in every community. If you run into some difficult personalities, you have some old guy who's always coming in to the youth department kiddush and helping himself, or you have some old battle axe who's always yelling at the kids, "Don't touch my closets, that's the sisterhood." They live everywhere. And the rabbi can teach you how to work around some of these kinds of personalities. If you go to make partnerships with other organizations in the community, you and the shul, you and the Y want to co-sponsor some activity, it's a great idea, but you make sure that you have run the idea by the rabbi, because he may have history, and he may know who are the people you can do business with and who aren't. And even better, he may be able to make a single phone call which will smooth your way, or brainstorm with you and bring even more support aboard to make the result of whatever it is you're planning much more successful. You want to make sure that you are a conduit of information to the rabbi, not just about programs, but about what's going on with the individuals in the shul. You will be the one who sees that the 8-year-old son of some prominent member is not quite right. Or you may notice that one of your junior high school girls never eats anything on a Shabbaton. You may notice that in a given family, the way children are disciplined just doesn't smell right to you. Keep a line of communication open between you and your rabbi on the DL, because great prophecy often is the result of good information. One last thing about the rabbi, and this is a little bit sensitive. You have to assess him, because there are rabbis who are terrific with kids, and there are rabbis who are wonderful people. They're just not comfortable with youngsters. They're kid-phobic. You put them up to talk to a Shabbaton, you may as well have put up a cardboard cutout. They just don't come alive with kids. What do you do in each case? If you have a rabbi who is a real kid-friendly rabbi, someone who enjoys the company of youngsters, and that can be anything from telling stories to third graders or talking to teens about the most serious things. If you have a rabbi who's good with kids, as you plan your programs, create a niche for him. That doesn't mean that every program has to be the rabbi. But you know that if you have a Shabbaton and you give the rabbi 15 minutes, that he'll warm up the crowd. He'll make the guests feel comfortable, maybe get a few laughs. If you have a youth leader who's having difficulty, perhaps the rabbi can counsel. Remember that many of us old war horses began our careers doing work very much like yours. And for some of us, working with youngsters is the very happiest and most rewarding part of the job. So make a place for the rabbi in your programs, and he will see you as the link to the part of his job that gives him the greatest sweet satisfaction. What happens if your rabbi is not especially comfortable with kids? Here you have an even more important role. You have to protect him. What do I mean protect him? It means to make sure that the children learn to have respect for him. It means not creating roles for him in which he is going to not exactly succeed. And perhaps especially in those circumstances where he has inevitable, unavoidable contact with kids, ask if you can be helpful as his buffer or as his associate. For example, Hashem Yirachem, none of you should ever deal with this. What happens when a young person in the community passes away? And maybe it's sudden. And the rabbi's going over to the house, and there are, a couple of kids in junior high and a couple of kids in elementary school. And the rabbi, trust me, is terrified. Dealing with this kind of event is always horrible. It's always difficult. But knowing that he's going to have to sit with little kids and not really be able to connect to them is going to make it doubly so. If he knows that if he has to walk into such a situation, that his youth director will be by his side, Avraham Megayer es Hanoshim, Sarah Megayer es Hanoshim, a kind of divide and conquer, that there will be, so to speak, a kind of a youth rabbi or Rebbitzin, for those ladies out there, who will be at his side to work in partnership to be there for the kids. First of all, it will enhance your role in the community. Secondly, it will make your rabbi very grateful that he has you on his team. And he will see you as something much more crucial than the person who buys the pretzels and orders the buses. Quick note, because this was not part of my assignment, some of you will be in synagogues that have professional chazonim, have cantors. Many of the things I just spoke about, rabbis, also applies to the chazonim. And the more you can get the chazan involved with youth programming, the more you can bring the musical talents and the knowledge of nusach that he possesses into your program, the better he will look. Because every shul is asking, what does that guy do the rest of the week when he's not davening? And he will be grateful to you, but you will also have, especially if he has a knack with kids, you'll have a source of great enhancement. Let's move over to the lay leaders. Now, I've divided the lay side of your congregation into three, sort of moving from your epicenter outward. The first is the youth committee itself. Now, frankly, in many congregations, the youth committee is not always comprised of the most powerful leaders in the shul. Usually, who gets on the youth committee? People who have children in the youth program. Well, in some of the later steps, which I'll describe in a moment, you may find that you're actually able to get powerful senior leadership to serve on the youth committee, thereby bulking up its muscle. You may actually be able to do that if you make the right friends. But let's speak about the youth committee, Basher Heim Sham. You want to make sure the youth committee exists, lives, and breathes as your advocate and the advocate of the program that you're designing for the children. That means you want them to be present when activities take place, but even more, you want them to be part of the planning, part of the design, so that they have a sense of ownership. And, as always works with lay people, you need to make sure that you give out lots and lots and lots of credit. A wise man once said, anyone can get anything done that he wants or she wants, as long as they're willing to give the credit to others. People love to see their names in the shul bulletin. When you describe an activity after the fact, you just write a list of all of your committee members who've had anything to do with it and make them feel a sense that the success is theirs and that people in shul are going to come up to them and give them a big yasher koach. Why is that important? Because you may not be at the board meeting when the budget comes up. And when some feisty old curmudgeon decides that the shul should balance its budget by cutting the youth, you want the youth committee members to be passionate, informed, and relentless advocates. Because you know what? At any given meeting, it is the human stuff that people bring to the table which creates the real energy. It doesn't matter if you're older or younger, richer or poorer. If someone stands up at a shul meeting and they are ferociously committed, they are going to sway people's opinion. Now, stop just short of having them take out a machine gun and mow down the opposition. You don't want people to become abusive. Does anyone think that shooting people with a machine gun is abusive? No one laughs through a computer. I think you should could you please do me a favor? If you think anything is the slightest bit funny, could you please email this lady right over here, Penny, so I don't stand up feeling like an idiot. Of course, waiting 10 minutes to get past a note. The one thing you said 10 minutes ago was funny. It's cold comfort. But at least I should bring my own laugh track. Next, I'll just push a button. I'll laugh at my own jokes or have somebody I know. Anyway, we're perfecting the medium. This is only the first one of the year, and the next webinars will be much better because there'll be other people doing them, but also because we will have learned from watching me flounder up here like a beached whale. I think the most important group for you to zero in on is the senior leadership of the shul, i.e., people who are really running the show, and B, who are likely to have no children in the community. Now, why should they care? You want to make sure that you and the youth department are assets in terms that are meaningful to them. Now let's talk about how you translate yourself into terms meaningful to senior shul leadership who don't have kids. Number one, in this crazy time we're living through, fiscal responsibility. A youth director who is careful, precise, and creative about the budget is going to be a valuable member of the team. That means fundraising and cost cutting. Fundraising can be anything from running activities, the benefits of which go to the youth department, to soliciting sponsorships for various activities. And here you got to be a little careful. Consult your rabbi and your president, because you don't want to be raising money and be seen in competition. But for example, suppose you notice that a given kid has grandparents who come from time to time and who come over to you and say, my granddaughter, she just loves your activities. She is the greatest. And you happen to know that these are people of comfortable means. And you call them and say, Mr. and Mrs. Schwartz, I was wondering if you might consider, in honor of your grandchildren, sponsoring this year's Teen Minyan Kiddush in honor of your grandchildren, for whatever it is, some money that comes from outside of the community and comes via the youth department. You're going to be the hero of the year. Cost cutting. When everyone else is worried about money, and you can demonstrate that you are really watching the pennies, that you are finding ways to do more with less, this will speak to your lay leadership. Entrepreneurship. That means keeping your eye out for partners and for sponsors. And sponsors here goes beyond fundraising from grandparents. Sponsors may be corporate sponsors. If you happen to know that someone in the community has a given business that might have a link to something you're doing, that if, let's say you have a chesed corps and a local nursing home, or a local business that sells health supplies, might be very interested to have the uniform T-shirt of the kids in the Chesed Corps saying their name. You might manage to get an entire aspect of your program sponsored, but you have to think out of the box, and you have to be prepared to create creative structures that will keep the shul broadly supported. C, and I know this sounds crazy, careful record keeping. You have no idea how much the leadership of a shul appreciates when there is a carefully done spreadsheet of exact expenses, careful records of how many children attended. All those kinds of things, which frankly are sometimes a nuisance, but precision is a very important part of demonstrating financial and fiscal responsibility. Number 2, interest in and support for other shul activities, right? And this works on 2 levels. This means in terms of mobilizing the youth, so that in many shuls, no one should plan anything without some part for the kids to play. If the shul is having a Hanukkah supper, then maybe the kids can be the busboys. If the shul is planning some kind of an outing for senior citizens. Maybe some of those people need escorts or chaperones. Every time the shul is doing something, if you show that you're interested in bringing the youth of the shul into that activity, you become the friend of every single chairman of every single activity, even the ones that have nothing specifically to do with kids. The same applies to your own participation. When the youth director is seen at every shul function, is visible, and is not just there when it's her job, that sends the message that you consider the entire community to be your community, even though you are specifically assigned where you are. So, for example, I think it is not only good mitzvah, but good strategy for a youth director to be available as a member of the Chevra Kadisha. Could anything be more widely separated from what people associated with youth activity? But it means that the kinds of people who were involved with that will see you personally as someone who cares about the important things in the community. Most people in a shul are going to encounter the shul at Shabbos services. Try to get yourself a profile. How do you get a profile at Shabbos services? Well, you work with the Gaboyim, for example, to create a complete list of all of the young men who have had their bar mitzvahs in the past 4 or 5 years. Many Gaboyim drown trying to find volunteers to read the Torah. If the youth leader says, here is a list, and I've already spoken to these young men, each of them would be ready to read his bar mitzvah parsha if you ask him. You can float the sinking ship of the Gabbai at least a third out of the water. Shuls love it when little kids sing Anim Zemiros, lead Enkelokenu, Yigdal, those kinds of parts. If you become a key personality in organizing that, in letting the people who write the bulletin know Yigdal this Friday night will be led by, Anim Zemiros will be led by. And I remember when I was a kid, this was such a big deal. Not only did they publish the name of the kid, they published coming attractions, who was doing it next week. So this kid got 2 weeks of shout out in the bulletin for one lousy Yigdal. And when that kid would sing Yigdal, especially when it would be promoted ahead of time, you can't imagine the crazy things that people would do. Grandparents would come to spend the Shabbos. Right? They'd come from Detroit because little Pee-wee is singing Yigdal. It's amazing. People are crazy. Take advantage. Why not? The big D word. You don't even want to talk about this. Decorum. That's the worst word in the whole world of synagogues because none of us have any control. If the youth leader is seen as somebody who actually has at least the child dimension of that issue, under some kind of gentle control, meaning there is a place for every kid to be, meaning that kids are not wandering around in the halls and in and out of the shul, you're a hero, because decorum is the great green dragon, and no one seems to know how to slay it. So you can't slay it, but you might cut off a claw or two if you can at least keep the kids quiet. Question you want to ask all the time. When are you and the youth visible? Because you really want to make sure that you are a presence, and as I said before, not a budget item. So if the leaders of the shul see a little fellow going up for the first time to sing Yigdal, and the youth leader, the youth director's arm is around him, and this works if you're a guy, if you're a girl, you can get him as far as you're allowed to go, but they see that you are the coach. You are the one who is the enabler and the organizer. That visibility is important. I know a shul, for example, where when there is a bar or bat mitzvah celebrated in the shul, it is the youth director who makes the presentation. I saw a youth director, if you're out there listening, in Vancouver, Canada, who came on after 2 rabbis had spoken. I thought there were going to be food riots because these poor people were so hungry, and they called on this relatively recently employed but extremely talented youth director. The guy got the whole shul singing. It was like a miracle. It was like an NCSY rally somewhere east of Adon Olam. And he brought the place to life. But more important, he established a presence for the youth department in full visible sight. It's also very helpful. You need to keep an eye on who the people are in your shul who really run the show and issue strategic invitations. That means you put people in the way of the Nachas train. You make sure that if you have an 84-year-old treasurer who's been in the shul since Grover Cleveland was president, right? Last interaction with a kid was when someone rode over his foot with a motor scooter and broke 3 toes. This guy hates everybody by this time because his sojourn on earth has left him with nothing more than the obligation to make sure that the shul never spends any money for anything ever. You take this guy and you say to him, Mr. Green Jeans, I want you to be my personal guest at the Shabbos lunch. We're hosting NCSY youngsters from all over. But I want you to do more of that. I want you to talk to the kids for 5 minutes about what shul was like when you were their age. Do you think you can do that? I don't know. I don't give speeches. Why do you want from me? I never gave a speech. I'll help you. I want you to be there. This guy gives a speech. The kids give him a standing ovation. All of a sudden, Ali Baba's cave is open, and you only have to help yourself to all the money you want. Probably not. But you know what? You'd be amazed where you'll find a warm heart when you dig a little. And so many people want to feel that their involvement in a shul is going to live after them and that it really is creating something. So bring them close to the warmth and watch them warm up. I think there's a lot to do with the third group, and that is the congregation at large. I think that youth departments can do a great deal in shuls, especially that have an older population. Some of that outreach can mean helping elders who are a little shaky on their feet, sending someone to walk with them to shul. It can mean, if there's a kiddush, having an elder's table which gets table service from youngsters so they don't have to fight for the food at the kiddush. There are groups within every shul who can really use involvement from the youth. Gaboyim, mentioned already about Kriyas HaTorah, but there are other things as well. The Bikur Cholim group, the Chevra Kadisha, for your senior high students. I don't think that with their parents' permission, working with Shemira and even to do Taharos in communities which are short-handed, I don't think it's going to hurt anybody. It will, I've seen it just bring out a maturity and a sense of meaning in a teenager, which is just remarkable. But even on the other side, on the Nichum Avelim side, teaching youngsters how to prepare a house for a family that's going to be sitting Shiva. Commandeering youngsters not only to attend, but to organize minyanim in houses of mourning. All these kinds of things will make the kids, and therefore you, into assets for the shul. One last thing was just a personal suggestion. Training the children of the shul in derech eretz. making this part of all of your activities in such ways that even the adults in the shul will see not only that the kids in your particular synagogue are different, but they're different from kids that they encounter everywhere. That means training kids to hold doors for older people, training kids to go up to people and say good Shabbos. The number of people who come to shul, particularly older people, widows, people who are alone, and hardly anyone says anything to them. Kids walk by them, especially because we live in a time when we are separated by generations in a terrible way. To be greeted by bright-faced youngsters, just to say good Shabbos, and if they learn the name, even good Shabbos, Mrs. Cohen, good Shabbos, Mr. Goldberg. How are you, Mrs. Rabinowitz? My daughter, I give her a shout out right here on national webinar. My daughter Rivka is the hero of the ladies' balcony in the RJC because she has made friends of many of the older women just by being respectful, just by saying good Shabbos, like every human being should be. But if the youth department makes it a big deal and talks about it and models it, it can create a culture in a shul where the entire shul, with one voice, will become advocates for the youth department and its leadership, because it is the youth department which will, I believe rightly, prove itself to be the real soul of the Avodas Hashem that goes on in that shul. Do we have any questions? Is anyone really out there? What do we think, Penny? There are at least 3 people watching. One of them is my mother. I understand. She's very faithful. Hello, Rabbi Rockoff in Kansas City. You get a shout out. Anybody else? Any other shout outs? Chai Dollar from Charles. Yeah, what?
But we want to open it up for questions.
We are open to questions. And you can send the emails to Penny, and be warned, if you don't send any questions, I will just go away, because that'll mean I'm finished.
We have one in our live audience.
We have one live one, a plant from the Riverdale Jewish Center. One of the great youth directors in North America, my own precious David Freund. Now he's going to ask, why don't you do any of this in our shul, Rabbi?
I know I get to benefit every time I watch the rabbi tell the kids a story, and usually it's more of a learning experience for me, just to pick up on how I can tell a story. Maybe you can touch upon that and tell us a little bit more about what we can do or what we can teach our high school leaders to do when they're trying to tell a story, bring out the parsha.
It's a little bit of a hard thing to teach, but I think the basic thing is you have to be entertaining yourself. If you really want to get through to a kid, do not say something which you find boring. If you're really enjoying it, if you are seeing it in your mind as you tell it, if you find it moving, then the likelihood that is what will come over to the kids is much higher. The other thing is, I don't know how to teach people basic communication skills. People have different packages from God. Try not to go If the story doesn't flow, the modem's shut down on the part of the receivers. So just keep it light, keep it lively, and keep it interesting to yourself. The worst thing in the world is when someone falls asleep in the middle of a speech and it's the person giving it. That is the worst. Any other questions, Penny?
Yes.
No. We're underwhelmed with questions here. What are we going to do?
How does a young youth director who just came in work with a board that's set in their ways and have been doing the same thing for years, and the rabbi and board are kind of, in this old mentality, and a young youth director comes in? How should they best correctly deal with that kind of situation?
Okay, how do you deal with stagnation? I'm just making the question a little shorter. I think that's what you mean. Well, first thing you do is do not come in, and this is advice for anyone coming into a position of community service. Do not come in as the person who knows all the answers and who can't understand why everyone involved in the situation is so hopelessly stupid. That's a dangerous place to be, because you will then make it in people's interests to prove that you're also stupid. What you want to do is some of the kinds of conversations that I mentioned here, what you want to find out is, in their mind, what would they like to see? What for them would be a value-added youth department? So getting financially organized, certainly something you can do unilaterally, and everyone knows about the bottom line. Your conversations with the rabbi, helping him look better in any of the ways we discussed, and then breaking into those groups. Talk to the Gaboim. Find out what their problems are. Most shuls which have gone stale are populated by people who feel like they're the last guy holding the bag. You know, I've been Gabbai here for 47 years. I'm tired, but no one else will do it. You know, the sisterhood, none of the young women will help me. I do it all alone. You see that, kiddish? I cut all that cake myself, and I have arthritis. They're all sad and frustrated. They're not a happening place. You think they like the status quo? They don't know how to move from it. And if you can make their work cool by bringing some kids to involve in it, you'll be the Mashiach. Don't worry about the fact that they're boring because they've run out of new ideas. If you have some new ideas and you make them think that they thought of them, you're in a good place.
Okay, the questions are coming in now.
Oh boy, there is. Oh my goodness gracious.
Okay,
What's going on in America?
We have one from Rabbi Donnie Rockoff from Kansas City.
This is going to be a tough one.
Who should be the youth director's direct supervisor?
I think the youth director should be co-supervised by the rabbi and the executive director. I think if you're in a shul that's lucky enough to have an executive director, minus an executive director, you want to find out who is doing the executive director's responsibilities. Sometimes the rabbi does it all. Sometimes the rabbi and a lay leader, like the president, will be the sort of split, and a lay leader will effectively be the executive director. I think those are the two ideal people for the youth director to take his orders from, because taking it from lay leadership makes it a little complicated.
Okay. We have from Ari Silver. He's the youth director at Lower Marion Synagogue.
Hey, Ari, one of my favorite shuls.
What is your philosophy about prizes for groups?
What is my philosophy about prizes for groups? I don't have a terrible problem with prizes, as long as they are in the modest range, with the exception of big deals, like, I don't know, some kid who learns all Mishnayos Baal Peh. I will tell you, I'm not crazy about the candy that we're pushing in our communities. I think the kids are altogether over-candified. I think we as a community are looking at an avalanche of diabetes coming up in the next generation, and Jews have a genetic proclivity in that direction. And frankly, I think that shuls are more in danger from obesity than they are from alcoholism. You have to draw your own conclusions. I think the bad modeling that we do in shuls about the ways in which food is used, which includes candy and kugel, is something that really has to be taken seriously educationally. We should be thinking much more carefully about poisoning kids in shul.
Okay, now we have Jamie Bindell, and you said it is...
Where's Jamie? Where are you, Jamie?
So he said that you
We
said
have no idea where Jamie is. We've lost Jamie. There is a person in cyberspace named Jamie.
we have Jamie. You said it is important to
You
get.
still didn't tell me where Jamie is from. Do you know? You can say you don't know. It's okay, Penny. We still love you. Penny put this whole thing together. She is Wonder Woman. But we'd like to know where Jamie... Okay, Jamie, I'll answer your question. It's on spec. I mean, the fact that you're in New Hebrides in the middle of the Pacific Ocean, what do I care? The kids there need a youth director too. What does Jamie want to know anyway?
So you said it's important to get the kids involved in doing things in the community, like helping out at a shiva house and talking to the elderly people in the shul. How do you get them to do that?
By example, by inspiration, and by expressing gratitude, particularly in print and from the pulpit, so that they feel like they've done something really important. Celebrate them. You know, the notion that kids somehow function differently, the portrait of our kids as being cynical and selfish, if you think of them that way, that is the way they will respond. If you see the goodness, and look, maybe it won't be every single kid. There are kids out there who are drowning just from the pressure of school. But there are also kids who, to feel that they have a special inside place with you or with the rabbi, that they're part of the Shiva House team, for example, you're going to call up great things from them, I promise you.
Okay.
Did we find out where Jamie is? I'm dying of curiosity. Do you really have a job, Jamie, or are you freelance?
Beth Jacob.
Beth Jacob in?
Not sure.
You know how many Beth Jacobs there are in the country. I know one in Oakland. I know one in Los Angeles. I know one in Columbus. So Jamie really does not want to be found. This is the mysterious Jamie. Okay.
Okay. Now we have, here we go, Columbus, Ohio.
That's where Jamie is?
Yes.
Excellent. Well, I know you've got a great rabbi. So moving right along.
Thank
you, Jamie.
How does one make their youth department stand out or do programming when they are competing with schools who are also always doing extracurricular activities and with game systems and the avenues and all of these different things going on in common day society?
Okay.
That's
Yitzi
Haber.
Where's that from?
Yitzi Haber?
From?
Yitzi
We
Haber.
don't know where Yitzi is either. Maybe it's with Jamie. How many youth directors they need in Columbus, Ohio? They don't even have a decent airport in that town. How many youth directors they have? One of you, go work in the airport. Okay. The key problem is that many of those who are working with kids are competing on the entertainment level of their lives. I believe that youth departments need to compete on the meaning level. And remember, whatever the school is doing, whatever the mall is doing, you've got them on Shabbos. There's an old tradition, it's mentioned by the Dubna Maggid and by many others, that the whole tenor of the week is determined by the way we spend Shabbos. One of the most important problems we're facing right now as a community is we've got electrically wired kids. Core things in their lives, like their texting, all depends on the use of electricity. We have never had such an assault on Shmiras Shabbos as we have now with these wired kids. If you have them for the 25 hours of Shabbos, if you can fill Shabbos with things that are meaningful, with things that are enjoyable, with things that give them actual human contact, unheard of. You don't get Facebook, you actually get a real face. Amazing. If you can fill in these really serious gaps in their experiential and emotional lives, I believe that you will hold them. And frankly, a shul and a school should be working in partnership, because we are the living laboratories. They may be teaching the classroom part of the course, but when it comes to the lab, we are the lab. We're the place where it is proven whether all the stuff that they're sitting through in school during the week is actually finding a place in their hearts and in their priorities. So, for example, a school can get a kid reading Chumash for the next test all week long. Have they created a learner? That will be determined by whether this kid wants to learn something when no one's giving a test. We're the lab. You provide a sense that the school can give you knowledge, but the shul can give you a real role. Many of the things we've discussed here are about making the kids feel like the shul really needs them, that they have real adult-sized contributions to make. And we don't realize how hungry our children are for some sense that they make some difference to someone. You put a kid, you have a 7-year-old who's learned to take around the pushki at Mincha and Mariv every day, and you have a child who has found a place in the world where they feel a sense of respect and a sense of accomplishment and a sense of belonging. Who else we got out there?
So also just want to let you know that Yitzi's actually not in Columbus. He's actually young Israel of Lawrence, Cedarhurst.
Hey, okay, Yitzi, I'm glad you got out of the airport in Columbus because that was no future for you. Lawrence, Cedarhurst, on the other hand, now you're talking. Okay.
Okay, so I don't know. We actually got from Jonathan Moses. He's out in Winnowwood, PA.
Winnowwood, PA?
Winnowwood, yeah.
Wynwood.
Wynwood.
Oh,
Excuse
Wynwood.
me.
I didn't just say
Excuse
Wynwood,
me,
the thriving metropolis
I'm
of Wynwood.
Sorry. Yeah.
Oh, in PA. Okay.
So it's actually funny because I didn't prompt this question, but the question actually is how can or should parents be incorporated into the youth activities? And it's funny you might ask this question because our next webcast is actually on that exact question.
Who's giving it?
So that's actually going to be given by Rabbi Shlomo Einhorn.
I'm not going to give an answer if Shlomo Einhorn is.
Who's
you know how great he is? He is such a smart guy, and he's even funnier than me. So I think we're going to, if you don't mind, John, I'm going to ask you to tune in for Rabbi Shlomo Einhorn.
Please be...
Because I wouldn't want to Einhorn into any of his
we will definitely,
subject.
We will keep you all updated.
Hold your breath till then, everybody. I want to hear a lot of blue youth directors are out there holding their breath, counting the days.
The next webcast is going to be in December, and we're really looking forward to that.
I can hardly wait myself. Yes. What else do we have?
So at this time, I think we're running out of time because we said it wouldn't.
It's dinner time. People got to eat. You know what I'm saying?
We said it would only be about an hour.
Okay.
But you know what? Do we have time for one last one?
Sure.
Okay. So this is an anonymous one.
Oh, boy. But what shul do they work for?
I don't know. Anonymous shul. So for shuls that can't afford full-time youth directors, do you have any creative suggestions of partnerships within a community to bring in talented youth directors?
Absolutely. This is one of them. I'm being totally serious. One of the very important roles of the rabbi and, frankly, of the Orthodox Union is this issue of communities that need composite positions in order to bring top talent to bear on various things. So a discussion with the rabbi of the community to begin with, to find out perhaps there is need for a teacher in a school. Sometimes there are positions available, part-time chaplaincies in hospitals and in prisons. Sometimes there is hashgacha work that the OU can perhaps help fix you up with within the catchment area of a given community, which can make it possible for a youth director or even a husband and wife youth director team to settle into a community and to live with dignity and with sufficient resources so that they can, live their lives and raise their family in a bekovidik way. These composite positions are among, I think, the greatest priorities that we have, because you don't want people working part-time who are fractional talent. In other words, just dragging in a warm body who will work cheap. That's not a way you build community. However, the notion of different partners co-sponsoring excellence, that's a whole different thing, and I believe has a great future if we develop it. Can I just say at the end of this, I'd like to give my email address if I could, which is JIR at rjconline.org. My phone number is 718-548-1850, and then just punch all the numbers that will get you to me or to my answering machine. If there's any question I didn't answer, if there were any issues which are simply too sensitive to be discussed in this kind of a forum, I want each and every one of you to feel that you have access to me anytime you need, because the task of being Mamid Dor Yesharim, of establishing an upright generation of Jewish kids, is the responsibility of absolutely all of us, and much of it is in your hands. And so if your hands need some support, please don't hesitate. I just want to thank Penny again for her remarkable passion about the work she does and the beautiful arrangements. She certainly made me comfortable in every conceivable way she could think of. Thank the people in the studio audience, and thank Rabbi Steve Weil and the Orthodox Union for their vision, which encompasses the visions of so many. Thanks a million.